Do you have a creak in your bike and it's driving you crazy trying to figure out where it's coming from?
Well, it can be frustrating having a creak in your bike. Where's the sound coming from? Well, quite often you'll find that after riding in the wet or after winter, given a slight period of time, it dries out a bit and a creak develops. That's because the joint has started to dry up and maybe there's some contaminants in there as well. So, where's the sound coming from? So with the carbon bikes, they transmit sound very efficiently throughout the whole bike. Difficult to tell where the sound's coming from. What might sound like your rear wheel creaking away will actually be in your seat pole area. What might be a groaning in your handlebars will actually be coming from your pedals. So, how do you find out where the sound's coming from? Process of elimination. Fix one area first. If it's still making a noise, it's obviously not that area, look somewhere else. But here's a shortcut. Bottom bracket. Yes, bottom bracket. A lot of moisture runs in that area because it's central and it's down low, and a lot of contaminants as well, and it can get in ever so slightly over time and cause a creak. So, bottom bracket. Particularly if you haven't done your bottom bracket in around 2 years or more, good idea, pull it apart and re-grease it and put it back together again. So that's what we're going to do in this video. Pull your bottom bracket apart, service and put it back together, and hopefully we'll fix your creak, no more creak. Pulling your bottom bracket apart and putting it back together again may seem like a daunting experience, but don't worry. We're going to make it as simple as possible and as cheap as possible. However, with your modern bikes, you need some specific tools. Number one, a torque wrench. Get yourself a torque wrench if you haven't already got one. Number two, a dental pick. Very, very handy. Very cheap on eBay, a dental pick. You may or may not need this one, bottom bracket cap remover. We'll show that later on in the video. And most important is the press tool for your cups and bearings. That's the tool from the previous videos. If you haven't made one, watch the videos, make one, because they're designed to come apart and form other tools. So, now you're ready, let's go and fix your bottom bracket.
Firstly, remove your chain and your front and your rear wheels. This makes it easy to access your bottom bracket area and flip your frame around when you need to. Remove your left hand crank. In this case it's Shimano Dura-Ace crankset, so we need to undo the 2 Allen key pinch bolts. And if you have Shimano Hollowtech cranks, you'll need to remove the preload cap with the Shimano crank arm preload cap tool. And they're very cheap to buy if you haven't got one. Remove the pinch bolts and pull the crank arm off. Using a piece of wood, put it over the end of the bottom bracket axle and give it a shove with the palm of your hand, and that should remove the rest of your crankset. For the next step, a dental pick is very handy. It has a fine but strong pointed end. Use it to remove the dust caps on the left and the right side of your bottom bracket. Now put a large tray under your bottom bracket to catch the bearings when we pop them out. Looking into the bottom bracket shell, you can see the other side's cup and bearing from the inside. To remove the sealed bearing, you only need to lightly tap the inner race, alternately at opposite ends, or here like I've illustrated at the red dots. To do this you can use a blunt, flat-headed screwdriver and a small hammer, and just tap lightly.
Another way to knock out your bearings safely is to use a piece of dowel. So here we got a rake from the $2 shop for $4. And remember, the inside diameter of your bearings is 24. So here the rake handle is about 22. So that'll do just fine. So you get your piece of dowel and you put it all the way through. Right, all the way through. This time you put a little bit of pressure like that, and as you pull it back, you just feel it. It clicks. It's just come off the inside lip of the bearing, so it's just sitting on now the cup, and it's ready to hit. And the same up the top. Move it up to the top, and you'll feel the lip. Right, ready to go.
Give the bearings a bit of a clean on the outside. And using the dental pick again, remove both bearing seals. Right, so now we're using petroleum in our chain cleaner jar to thoroughly clean the bearings. If you haven't yet got a chain cleaning container, watch this video on how to make one. This bottom bracket has press-in cups, and so they'll tap out in exactly the same way as the sealed bearings did. So you can either use your flathead screwdriver or your piece of wooden dowel. And place the two cups also in a chain cleaner to give them a thorough clean as well. The two dust caps that we earlier removed, they were pretty mucky, so we'll give them a wipe with paper towel first, and then we'll put them in the chain cleaner as well. And now we're up to cleaning the bottom bracket shell with some degreaser and a toothbrush. Then rinse off the degreaser with some water. And then wipe out your bottom bracket with a nice clean rag. And we're up to the crankset, and with a clean rag, clean up any caked on grease and dirt. Do the same with the left hand crank, and don't forget to clean inside the spline area there. We're also now going to clean the pinch bolts and the preload cap. And we'll finish up cleaning the crankset with some more degreaser and a brush. And it's a good opportunity to clean the inside of your chain rings too. Make sure they're absolutely perfectly clean. Make sure you clean the axle thoroughly, because it only really takes a small piece of hard dirt and that'll cause a creak between your bearing and the axle. And thoroughly clean the splines on the left hand crank, and of course the recesses for the pinch bolts. And allow your crankset to sit and dry out for a while. Meanwhile, the bits in our chain cleaner container will be ready. Petroleum cleans very well, but it leaves a slightly oily and dirty film on the components. We'll need to clean this off further with degreaser. So with gloves on, degrease every part thoroughly. Get that degreaser inside the sealed bearing as best possible so you can have them completely cleaned. Now wash all the degreaser out with water. Then put all the parts out to dry. I'm just using some paper towel. See how well the bearings now spin? Because you've stripped out all the grease from your bottom bracket, you'll need to thoroughly re-grease it all. A medium-sized syringe is good at keeping new grease clean and also in applying it into awkward spots. In case you're wondering, I'm using white lithium grease. Start by putting an even layer of grease on the bottom bracket bearing seat on both your left and your right side. Grease the bottom bracket bearings and give them a spin with the palm of your hand, quite a few turns to make sure that grease really gets into the bearing race itself. Flip the bearing over and if possible get some grease in the other side as well. And put the seals back on, and if your bearing seals are polarised you'll need to make sure the left goes on the left side and the right on the right side of course. Get your press fit cups and put a layer of grease on the flange that sits in the bottom bracket shell. Right, now time to press in your bottom bracket cups. I'm not going to tell you how to do that, but you can go to this video to do that with these cups, or if you've got the larger bottom bracket bearings in the BB30, go to this video to do that. And with a clean rag, clean off any excess grease that's on your frame. Now that it's clean, have a visual inspection and see that the cups are seating nice and squarely into your frame. And now a nice even coating of grease on both of your cups where your bearings are going to sit. And grease the outside of the bearing races. You might be thinking, oh, we're using a lot of grease. Well, yes, we are using a fair bit, but remember, we're trying to make your bottom bracket as impervious as possible to water and contaminants for the future. More grease, this time it's where the spider contacts the right hand bearing dust cap, the spline on the axle for the left hand crank, also where the inner race of your bearings contact the axle, both left and right side. And now the splines on your left hand crank. Now before you've put the final bottom bracket dust cap on, put a smear of grease on the outside of the bearings like this. Some dust caps clip into a bevel on the inner race of your bearings like this one. Here, see the bevel? The other side doesn't have the bevel, so you need to make sure when you press your bearings in that you've got them in the right way, with the bevel facing outwards. And finally, a small smear of grease on the inner race of your bearings. And now you're ready to put your cranks in. So put your crankset in on the right hand side and you'll find it should slip in nice and easy. Give it a tap with the palm of your hand, making sure it's all the way in. And now your left hand crank, making sure it's 180 degrees to your right hand crank, should just slip onto its splines. And now for the preload cap, yes, grease on the thread of that too. Now screw in that preload cap nice and firmly, but not too hard, otherwise your cranks won't spin very freely. If you go a little bit too far, just back it off a bit. There we go, just right. And now the pinch bolts, a bit of grease on their thread. And screw it into the crank by hand, just with an Allen key. And do the same with the other bolt.
And don't forget to use your torque wrench. Here it says 12 to 14 Newton meters. Well, that means 13, surely. Right. And do it up evenly as you go. Don't just wind up one all the way and then the other. Do it nice and evenly.
So that's it. Bit of a clean up now. Get rid of excess grease and grubby finger marks on your frame.
All done. How's it spin? Nice and smooth. And nice and free. Let's give it a clean ready for tomorrow. I've got to ride with the guys. We're doing about 1,000 metres and 86 to 90 k's, so that'll give it a good test to see if it creaks or not. Shouldn't creak. So yep, do your bearings once every season if you've got an average season. Here in South Australia we're a bit drier, but we had a wet year this year, so that's why I did it. But do your bearings at least once every 2 years, if not once every year after the winter. So make yourself that little tool as well, the bottom bracket press, and you'll be right. Okay, we'll see you on the road.